I just want to do God's will.
The kind of revolution that the world needs is a Christian revolution.
If you want a miracle, you've got to expect it to happen.
You are the recipients of God's grace and God's blessings, and you rejoice in that reality.
Welcome to Life Today Live. Good to have you here today. And I have a guest that I always enjoy talking to. And she's gracious enough to come on and do this, the online version of the program as well. She was recently in the studio. And so her broadcast program, it hadn't aired yet, I don't think. But the great thing about it is, yes, I just recently interviewed her. But my memory's so bad, I'm going to ask the same questions again, and it's going to sound all new to me. So I think
sounds good to me.
Does that work for you? All right. So yeah. I think you'll enjoy this. Andi Andrew is my guest, and if you don't know her, she has a podcast called Coffee with Andi, and many of you would really enjoy following up with that. So we'll tell you how to get that. But she also has a book out. She's got multiple books out. The latest book is called Braving Change, and this is something we all go through. Life is just, it changes, and sometimes that can be hard. So we're going to walk you through some of those things and maybe shift your perspective a little bit, make it a little less difficult, or maybe at least something that will pay off in the end. So appreciate you guys being here. Hello, Judy. By the way, Mary, if you're watching, we are trying to get a hold of Jamie. Thank you for the guest recommendation. He looks really good. Andi, good to see you again. How you doing?
Good to see you too. I'm doing really well. We were just talking about the pollen before we went live, and it's, really beautiful here.
It's South Carolina.
It's very, very yellow in Charleston, all over everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's the pollen dust on the car that you get in your car and your hood's yellow and you're like, I don't have a yellow car, but you do today. Yeah.
That I do. Yeah.
Now
but we're doing good.
That's quite a bit different from New York City, where you were for many years.
It is wildly different.
How's that transition been for you?
The transition's been good. I mean, the transition is good now. We've been here for 2 years. And so I feel like we've had some time to maneuver and walk through the different things that come with a major change like that. And pastoring in New York for 12 years was a sweet gift. But the moment that grace lifted, I'll tell you what, I was ready to go. And then when we got here, I would say it was about 6 months in, we had a sweet and soft landing. We're a part of an amazing church, Seacoast Church. And so the team here really welcomed us home. But I would say about 6 months in was when I started to deal with all of my grief and all of the different things I didn't even realize I had stored up inside of me that I needed to confront, so that I could process and do well. But I would say 2 years in, we really, really are at home. But there has been a lot to move through and work through in that change.
So you used a phrase there. You said when that grace ended. And I think I'd love you to unpack exactly why you used that phrase, because it's interesting. That's not usually how I hear it. But there is an ending to things that can be difficult, and a lot of times we want to hang on. How did you know that the time there had ended?
It was super interesting. So I would say in 2018, I actually thought that our time was over. My husband had come back from this retreat. His life had been deeply changed. And it was like his life was turning towards really ministering to and investing in pastors and leaders. And we were still pioneering and building this church. But in 2018, I said, I think we're done. Like, I think it's time for you to invest in this. And he looked at me and said, no, I don't think we are. Well, fast forward, we pastored through 2020, which was so fun. And then we get to 2021, and my husband just looks at me and he goes, okay, we're done. And it was almost like we were in agreement. But you're asking the question of how did we know the grace had lifted? For me, it slowly started to lift in 2018. And I had to really fight to be present in our assignment. But this is what I would say. So pay attention if you're wondering, like, if there's a season shift in a job or place or space, pay attention to the assignment. Because see, we all have our calling and even our identity in Christ that remains, but there is assignment shifts that happen in our
Mm-hmm.
life. And what I have found is, like, pastoring in New York, most people would not put their hand up for that. But when God graces you and gives you an assignment to pastor in New York City, there's joy even on the worst day. But towards the end, what started to happen is it felt like the gears were grinding. Like, it didn't matter how much oil you put on those gears, like, they were squeaking, it wasn't working. And so it started to become more and more obvious that a shift was taking place. And it was just a few things that kind of had to lock and load, like my husband and I being in agreement. And then once we were in agreement, we started to really notice that things had changed. And I know, there is his yoke is easy, his burden is light. I know that in the Message paraphrase of that scripture, it says that we oh my gosh, pay attention to his rhythms of grace. I'm getting it wrong, but it's a rhythm of grace. So, pay attention to when the song over your life, if you will, is changing. If you're still dancing a waltz and God has changed it to a hip hop song and you're like waltzing around, like, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's when you got to pay attention to the rhythm that is happening in your life. So I don't know if that's helpful. I hope that helped.
Well, so it does, and then I think sometimes for people it doesn't, because another message we often preach and hear is perseverance. And so, right. So when things seems like the rhythm is off, when things become difficult, when the joy isn't necessarily there, how do you know that's a sign that God's moving our assignment, or that's a time for me to buckle down and, not let the devil win, kind of thing?
Yeah, I think that all comes back to John 15 too. There's 2 points here. I would say we all need more discernment.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say in your time of prayer, asking God, going, God, I need more discernment. Will you give me more discernment to understand what is of you, what is holy, what is human, what is of me, what is what I want, and what is straight from the pit of hell. We need discernment to be able to do that. But the other is John 15. We need to get really good at abiding. We need to understand that a lot of times a season doesn't mean it's time to leave. A season shift could be that God is cutting off things in our life that is bearing no fruit. He's pruning that which does bear fruit, so that in seasons to come, there is growth. And what does that take? It causes us to persevere. Because I'll tell you what, I would say almost every year pastoring in New York City, I would put in my resignation to my husband and to God. I was like, this is too hard. But I knew that was human. That was how I felt in that moment. And it was a season and a time to persevere. So you have to pay attention to that, knowing, get wise counsel. There's a few different layers to that. But we always, always, always abide and remain in God no matter what, so that we know that we're hearing clearly. But always ask for more discernment too, to bring understanding to your season.
Yeah. What about the counsel of others? I mean, there's people in your life that you respect, that have some godly wisdom about them. Did you go to others and say, here's where we're at, we need discernment? Did you seek?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we had pastors at that time too, a few different sets of elders that were not elders within our church. So different spheres that we went to were obvious, like my mom and dad and my brother and sister that we're very close to, that have a lot of wisdom, and they have nothing to gain through a change that you know what I mean? Right. It's kind of like, it's not about them. They just would give godly counsel and wisdom. We had pastors that we went to. And then eventually when we started to sense and feel like, hey, this may be a major shift in the right order, that's when we talked to our board and our board of elders. And what was so crazy is, even at that time, when we're transitioning a church that we loved and we planted, what was so cool was that God had brought the right people into place that were to take the church. And so it ended up being like, oh my gosh, yes, this works. You guys are definitely meant to step into this new assignment, and we've got the right people to take it. So it was wisdom and counsel, but also the right pieces were in place to really continue to build the church and care for what we had already planted and tend that garden, but be able to walk away and know that it would move forward. So, yeah.
What a great confirmation on sort of the backside of the change to go, okay, yeah, I got to see you are working through this. So that's a real gift to get that. Let me ask you this, because we had a change a few years ago when our youngest of 4 graduated college, got married. We're empty nesters, and I felt like we were to leave where we'd been for 19 years. I didn't know where we were going to go. I knew we couldn't afford much around in the area the way the economy was back then. And I also knew I wanted to get a little bit away from the busyness of Dallas-Fort Worth, because it's getting really crowded here. Part of that was a church that I'd been at for 19 years, very involved in. Loved the pastor, had been with them through some real difficult times in their family, had great friends there, was on the worship team there, in rotation as a volunteer on a couple different worship teams. I mean, this is my church family, and I needed that working at a ministry. It was kind of funny because nobody from Life Outreach International was at that church, and so it was a good place for me to find that balance. And because when work and ministry are together, you need a little bit more. I needed more anyway.
Yeah.
When we moved an hour away from that church. We moved from the north side of Fort Worth down to the south side of Fort Worth, and the office is kind of in the middle. So I sensed, even before we did it, I knew. I felt what I call a release. Not that I felt bound by the church at all. I love the church. And so it was kind of a push release. It was like I knew. And so I went and said all my goodbyes to everybody. Some tears flowed, like we were moving. Once we knew where we were moving, in that transition where you're between houses, I was like, I feel like God's moving us, and I didn't know where we're going. And it's taken a few years to get rooted in another church, but now that's starting to come to fruition finally. And it's a wonderful church we're at right now. A little harder because we're in our 50s, having to make new friends, Yeah, you don't as good at that. But how much does that release? Because you sense it in your spirit. It's kind of hard to put words on, too sometimes. But I think God does sometimes kind of give us that, hey, you're going, it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, I love that you even brought that up, because it was the same for us. I mean, it was a church we were pastoring, but it was kind of like, if you hold on to this,
right,
like actually it's not going to go well for you or your people, because it's no longer your place. And so I think when you sense that, you almost know, like, I'm in disobedience if I remain here. We're in disobedience if we remain here. And then if we trust that God is sovereign and knows the beginning from the end, then he knows how to help me. I'm the same as you. I'm in my mid-40s making new friends again. And I was like, this feels hard. I was not ready for this. But and even with churches, that stuff is always hard, especially when it's people you love and you're like, nothing's wrong. I just know that we need to move on and transition and change. So I think too, part of this that I wrote is like about having integrity in that change. Yeah. Like, and that's not even, and that's multifaceted. I think when it's a difficult transition out of a church or something like that, how do you have integrity without throwing people under the bus? How do we live a life like Joseph, where we don't have to justify everything when we're thrown in the pit or we're thrown into what feels like prison? And God was with him and God favored him. And we don't run a PR campaign to let everybody know why we were right and they were wrong, So
No, that's a great point. And I want to go to that, because for me, that was easy. I mean, I still have great.
It was a good transition.
It was a wonderful transition, and there was no conflict. I have a friend, and I think I mentioned this on the broadcast show. I have a friend who was fired wrongly from a ministry. And you say, how do we do it with integrity? Well, you don't slander, you don't gossip, and even when you're right, you don't throw people under the bus. And this friend of mine years ago, he could have done that because he was right. And unfortunately, I know this pastor and the way he's treated multiple employees. And there's a pattern, right? So I had no doubt. But I watched my friend walk with, and you not just the idea of integrity of well, he didn't do anything wrong. No, he actually went out of his way to do everything right. He would speak blessings over these people. And at times, honestly, I was like, dude, you don't have to do that. I mean,
You don't have to bless them.
I know the Bible says that, but you kind of catch yourself going, it's just the way we are, right? Years later, though, I have watched that come back around. That ministry reached out to him and asked for help in ways, and I was like, and he went back and helped them, and I was like, really? And he was like, hey, look, this is God. I felt like God wanted me to do this, and I look at that in retrospect, and I go, wow, it wasn't just that he avoided the negatives of slander, gossip, the things he could have done, even when it was true, because gossiping isn't necessarily telling things that aren't true. Gossip, telling things that are true, right? But it was like, wow, he maintained such a huge level of integrity. I mean, my respect for him went up, and I watched the fruit of that, and it was good.
Yes. Well, that's where I've watched that time and time again. And even in our own lives, we've had to choose that when we've been wronged or we've walked through something, or people are like, spill the tea, tell us what's really going on. And you make the choice not to. You make the choice to have integrity before God, to honor, like the fruit will be good. So that guy, he's a real Christian. We need to have, him on the show. No, just kidding. But I think for me, that is like a huge thing, is like choosing honor, even when it's not giving back. It's not even given back. And Jesus says, and I write this, and I don't have the scripture reference right now, but I remember this one time when social media wise, there was a group of people that were like coming for me. Like it was cruel. It was mean. What they were saying, it was lies. It was slander. And I had my comeback ready to go. Like I was ready. And I felt like the Lord said to me, he said, turn the other cheek. And I was like, what, excuse me? And I went and looked up, and you know what's so interesting in this passage of scripture? Jesus says to those who are listening, and then he goes into bless those who curse you, pray for those who hurt you. And I'm like, it literally says to those who are listening, which means many of us are not listening and doing the right thing, but that is the higher way. So anyway, it's not easy, but integrity and change is vital, and it will bear good fruit. So.
Yeah, I've had those moments where I had it typed out and I'm ready to hit send or post, and you just and God's like, wait, and you're like,
hold your tongue.
Like, really? Like, really? But this is so easy in today's world, Okay. This is the book we're talking about, Braving Change by Andi Andrew. It's available wherever you get books. A wonderful book. You can also go to andiandrew.com and catch up with her, catch her podcast, see where she's going. She's still traveling, doing some speaking. So you might have a chance to be blessed in person by her, and it will bless you. A couple of things I do want to hit real quick, because I think these are important. One, briefly, and I just think it's good to state, is that when there is that change, whether it's, big in the sense of no longer pastoring a church in New York City, right? Or small, just in the sense that you're moving and things are moving. There is a little bit of a sense of sadness at times, and it's okay to allow yourself a little healthy bit of grief for closure, right?
Oh, yeah. And I think one of my favorite chapters, which sounds morbid, but is the grief chapter. And I think that as a society, we are not as good at grieving as we should be. And even scripturally, when you read the Old Testament and even New Testament with funerals, I mean, they would weep and wail and mourn. I mean, I'm sure coming across a funeral in those days would have been super uncomfortable in our society today. But a lot of times what we don't do is we get stuck in a cycle of grief. We don't come to a place of acceptance of our new season. We drag the past with us, and we don't release it. So to grieve and mourn is actually a beautiful release that takes place in our body, soul, and spirit. And I think we all know that if we don't grieve properly, it does store up in our body, and it will come out in some way. I mean, anxiety, sickness, gut issues, all these different things. But sometimes the best assignment for us is to go home, close the door, tell your family not to come in because it's going to get ugly in there. Put on a song that hits you in the heart and let the tears flow. Stop being strong for everybody because he comforts those who mourn, not those who are strong and do it themselves. But we got to let our arms down and let ourselves be picked up and held in those times and seasons of grief. It's really important.
I love that you give people permission to do that, because it is healthy. It can be, it needs to be healthy. And the other thing that I find that it does is that it contributes to that release where you know I have grieved that time, that move, whether it was relatively easy and just painful or difficult. You've kind of buried it. I think it's why we do this when we lose our loved ones. We bury them. There's a sense of that's done, but I'm not. So that, I like that. I think it's important, and so I appreciate you saying that. The last thing I want to hit, unless you got something else you want to say on that point, but
no, you're good.
Okay, is you talk about having a game plan for recovery, and again, just in my own life, when we moved, we didn't know anybody down there. Our game plan was, we're just going to go visit a bunch of churches and see where God leads us, which was this weird process, right? But what are you talking about when you say have that game plan for the other side of it?
Well, actually, your game plan was like a super practical game plan. That is what you needed in that season. You're like, I'm doing pretty good inside myself. I need to find a community of people that I'm going to do life with. And so that's a great game plan. But you may be in a place where you are grieving. You have a lot of loss. You have walked through a lot of pain or betrayal or rejection. Well, you can't stay there. So you have to have a game plan. And for me, initially this came out of a season that was really difficult for me, where panic attacks started coming back up. And I had chatted with my husband. He's like, I'm going to need you to call this specific friend. So I remember calling her. And in that season, this was about 3 years ago, she's like, hey, Andi, thank you for sharing all of this with me. Because it was very dark for me in that moment. She said, but you're going to be okay. And we just need a game plan to move forward. And so I was at a point in my life where I was ready to kind of strategically go, okay, so I'm going to go to a counseling intensive. I'm going to be in a Celebrate Recovery group for pastors, which was discipleship for my codependency issues. I'm going to, you know what I mean? And that was my game plan then. And now I've moved to Charleston. My game plan, it's different. I needed to intentionally make friends and pursue people. I wanted to make sure that I was staying healthy. I love working out. So I'm making sure that I'm investing in that and how I'm eating and caring for my family, the game plan of connection with my kids, so game plans will look different in every season of change. So just pay attention to what you need. But I write a lot about how to strategically put that together in your unique season.
And that also helps. It helps give you something to look forward to when you're closing out a chapter in your life. One more question, and this was not on my list, coming from some of the comments in the chat. When you've done this, right? I'm sure you've also seen other people not do it well, not transition well. Any thoughts on how to maybe help someone else who is stuck in that transition? Maybe they haven't grieved. Maybe they have zero game plan. Maybe they need to move, but they don't. They're staying there, but for whatever reason they can't let go and move into a new season. But just from the outside looking in, for those maybe who want to help a loved one who has not done this well.
Oh gosh. Well, I think it's hard when you have friends that are like maybe in a really tender spot and it's not the moment to say, pull up your bootstraps. It's time for a game plan, Right. And so I think for anyone where maybe you do have a loved one where they're not doing it well, they're stuck, they're struggling. First and foremost, always ask God for discernment on what in this season, what do you need me to say? How can I come alongside? I have a particular friend who was walking through a lot of grief and change, and I really did support her. And then it came to this turning point. And maybe this is where some of you are at. Depends on how much money you have in the relational bank too. But this person we've done a lot of life with. But I remember calling her up because she was like in a victim spiral. And I said, okay, we're done now. We have walked through grief. You are stuck. I cannot want this more. for you than you want it for yourself. And I spoke life over her. I was like, here's what I see for your future, but you're going to need to go after it. Here are some things that I suggest. I'm not leaving you, but you are going to need to show some signs of doing the work and moving forward. So you're going to have to read, like, do you need to just come alongside? Do you need to help them find a counselor? Do you need to tell them it is time to wake up and move forward? Do you need an intervention? Do you need... So I think that there are multiple things that we have to pay attention to when we're supporting other people. And then sometimes we just have to take our hands off because we cannot control the outcomes of other people's choices.
Yeah.
And so that is a little bit, it's like tender and difficult, but you can also just hand them this book. No, I'm just kidding. Hint, hint. No.
Yeah, right. You can get that wherever you get books. But you know what? You said something that I think is very important there, because our tendency is we're sort of like spiritual snipers. You know, we hover on the outside and then we try to come in with a kill shot and say this, and people don't hear it. But you said you had money in the relational bank. That is investing your time to walk along somebody. So if there's somebody that you're wanting to help, just the coming in and doing the thing and then leaving again usually doesn't work. And that may mean that what you need to start with is just being there. That what a friend of mine calls the ministry of presence. Being there, walking with them, even when they're not making the progress you know they should make. The investment of time is sometimes the hardest part because we're like, it's, it can be difficult, right? Yeah. So.
100%. But yeah, I think so. Know your relationship with the person too.
Yeah.
Before you dive in. I love that. Spiritual sniper. That's a good one. Yeah.
Seen that and been that guy and.
Me too.
I think it's easy to do. It's much easier, Anyway, all right. This is very, very, very good. This is very helpful. And if you guys watching want to follow up, you can check out the website, andyandrew.com, Andy with I, Andrew singular. And Andy, thank you. Is there anything you wanted to add before I let you go? This is really good conversation. Very helpful for a lot of people I know.
Nothing off the top of my head. I mean, the only thing I would say is keep staying tender, keep staying surrendered, and keep being obedient to whatever God's asking you to do, even if it feels hard and is hard.
Yeah, well,
that's all.
Yeah, well, you know what? That is what a lot of people needed to hear. So I appreciate you saying that. Appreciate you guys watching. If you know somebody that's going through a tough transition, hit that share button. And here's the website, andyandrew.com. And you can pick up the book, Braving Change, wherever you get books. Appreciate you guys being here. We'll see you again next time here on Life Today Live.
It is always possible to do the will of God. Nobody can prevent you from doing the will of God.